Welcome to this explainer from the Foundry by Forge College. Today, we're diving into ENS concepts for contract integration. If you hung out with us for the last lesson on preparing ENS names, you already know how to get your data cleaned up and ready. But now we actually have to build the plumbing. We're taking that abstract, human-friendly name and hardwiring it into deterministic, on-chain functions.
Okay, so think about this for a second. How does a smart contract actually read alice.eth? The truth is, smart contracts are basically notoriously stubborn bureaucrats. I mean, they are highly efficient calculators, sure, but if you hand them a human-readable string like alice.eth, they'll just stare at you blankly and reject your paperwork. They literally don't understand text the way we do. So how do we bridge that gap? How do they know where to actually send the funds?
Well, here is our blueprint for today. First, welcome to the post office. Then, the registry and resolvers. After that, hashing, the postal barcode. Then we'll look at the contract integration flow and wrap up with a summary and next steps.
Welcome to the post office.
To really demystify these highly abstract smart contracts, we're going to ground this whole architecture in a system we all know, the Postal Service. Honestly, if you can understand how a letter gets delivered, you absolutely understand ENS resolution. A human street address, like alice.eth, transforms into fixed-length barcodes that the network uses to route data. We've got a specific barcode for a single street segment, that's the label hash. Then we have a global barcode for the entire address, that's the name hash. The registry acts as the national address book, and the resolver? Well, that's your local mail carrier. You need both of them to get the mail delivered. Section 2, the registry and resolvers. Let's see how this builds into a two-layer system that separates ownership from actual record delivery. This separation of duties, it's the absolute core of the ENS architecture. The crucial takeaway here is understanding this exact split. The registry tells us who the mail carrier is, but you have to actually go and ask the resolver to get the final delivery address. The registry holds the authority. It knows who owns the domain, but it doesn't hold the Ethereum address you're trying to send money to. It just points you to a resolver contract. You basically have to go knock on that local mail carrier's door and politely ask for the final records. If we pop the hood and inspect the mechanics of the registry contract, it's actually incredibly lightweight. It only stores 3 fundamental pieces of data for any given name. First, the owner, who has the rights to change things. Second, the resolver address, telling us where to look for records. And third, the TTL, or time to live. That TTL is super important because it tells external applications how long they can safely cache the info before checking back, which, by the way, saves you and your users a ton of unnecessary gas fees. Okay, so we have the address book, but who actually delivers the mail? Knowing who owns the name is great, but as we see in a lot of Web3 engineering, your contract eventually needs the exact Ethereum address to execute a transaction. You can't just send ETH to an owner's abstract record, you need that hexadecimal address. And for that, we need our mail carrier. Section 3, hashing, the postal barcode. This brings us to the actual language the blockchain speaks. To talk to the registry or the resolver, we've got to convert our human words into cryptographic barcodes. Why? Because smart contracts absolutely hate variable length strings. They love fixed length data. A label hash cleanly encapsulates just one piece of the address, like the name Alice, into a fixed identifier using a Ketchak 256 hashing function. Think of it like taking a neighborhood name and stamping it into a standardized machine-readable barcode. Next, we combine those individual segments iteratively into the name hash. This becomes the single, unambiguous bytes 32 key that the entire ENS registry uses to look up records. It's basically a cascading algorithm. It takes the root, adds ETH, hashes it, then adds Alice, and hashes it again. The final result is this uniform 32-byte chunk of data that leaves literally zero ambiguity for the smart contract. I cannot emphasize this next point enough. Passing the raw string will not work on-chain. If your smart contract tries to ask the registry for alice.eth using raw text, it will stubbornly reject it. It will basically throw an error, take your gas money, and laugh at you. You have to use that bytes 32 name hash we just talked about. It is the one and only currency the registry accepts. Section 4, contract integration flow. Now, let's assemble the pieces of our blueprint and walk chronologically through a transaction. Say we're building a contract that lets users send a donation directly to alice.eth. How do we wire this up? Well, this 3-step algorithm is your golden integration path. First up, off-chain hashing. Prepare that barcode off-chain in your front end so you don't burn massive amounts of expensive gas doing text manipulation on the blockchain. Second, do a registry lookup.
Take that name hash and look up the mail carrier. Third, make the resolver call. Ask that mail carrier for the exact delivery address. It's a neat, highly predictable sequence. But because we are dealing with external modular contracts, your integration has to gracefully handle situations where things go wrong. What if the mail carrier doesn't exist, or they accidentally drop their bag in the river and it's totally empty? What if the registry returns a 0 address? That means no resolver is set. What if the resolver returns a 0 address? Well, the user hasn't set up their records properly. You absolutely have to code defensive fallbacks for all these scenarios so your contract doesn't just crash.
Section 5. Summary and next steps.
Let's wrap up our blueprints and distill what we've mapped out today. There are 3 key takeaways here. 1. The registry asserts ownership, while resolvers provide the actual records. 2. Always use off-chain namehash computations to generate those bytes 32 identifiers. And 3. Always design for fallback and failure modes. If you lock these 3 core principles into your mental model, you are going to avoid a massive class of bugs when writing your on-chain resolution logic. Defensive programming is your best friend here.
And with that, our prerequisite is complete. Building on our previous lesson about preparing ENS names, you now have the exact architectural mapping you need to safely write your Solidity lookup sequences. We took the human string, turned it into a mathematical barcode, and successfully navigated both the registry and the resolver. So before you actually start coding, I want you to ask yourself, if you cache a resolver address to save gas, what happens if the user updates their registry later? If you don't handle that, your contract might just send funds into a black hole. Think on that for a bit. And make sure to head over to forge.college to dive deeper into this and tons of other fascinating Web3 topics. Thanks for watching this explainer from Forge College, and we'll catch you in the next one.